Shanti, Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all joyous and suffering beings everywhere. Om Hari Om Tat Sat. So good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I thought I would share something with you. We're listening to Swami Prabhavananda. And I just wanted to share with you what it was like in the 1970s, early 1970s, when Swami Prabhavananda would speak in the Hollywood Temple. Now, if folding chairs are set up in front of the pews in the Hollywood Temple, and every seat is filled, which it would be when the Swami spoke, it holds a little over 100 people. If you didn't get there early enough to get a seat in the temple, you would have to go to the greenhouse living room, which was originally the lecture hall before the temple was built. And there was an audio feed. Now there's a closed circuit television feed over there, but in those days it was just audio feed. So you could at least hear the Swami live, as it were. But it was magical because the place would be absolutely packed, overflowing with people, all in anticipation of being in the presence of this charming, articulate, sweet, illumined soul. And so that's who we're hearing. That's who we're hearing. Swami Prabhavananda. We're reading his talk, Spiritual Unfoldment. And I'm going to go back just a paragraph or two and read into what he said, because we're coming to, so to speak, the pivot point of the talk. So here's where we'll begin. As you begin to feel the presence, and this is when you're doing your spiritual practices, as you begin to feel the presence, something stirs within you. Hindu psychologists and yogis explain it as the rising of the Kundalini, the divine energy. There comes great joy, and at the same time, an ache in your heart. You feel that ache because you have not yet seen him and you want to see him. Then comes greater earnestness, which is the Swami's translation of the Sanskrit word mumukshutvam, yearning, earnestness, more sense of dedication to your spiritual practice. Then comes greater earnestness. You feel him very near, yet you feel frustrated. There is such inner joy and at the same time an ache. It is a peculiar experience, but wonderful. Then you find that craving for sense objects becomes less and less. Things that used to give you pleasure no longer do, but you get a higher pleasure, and craving lessens as an ache becomes less and less assertive. So I'm going to go back over that because it's the end of the talk, and as I said, the pivot to this, what it is that we're seeking. As you begin to feel the presence, something stirs within you. Hindu psychologists and yogis explain it as the rising of the Kundalini, the divine energy, which, while not rising or not awakened, resides at the spiritual energy center at the base of the spine, the Muladhara. It lies curled up there, it is said, like a snake coiled. And so when you begin to do your spiritual practices regularly for some time, then there is this rising of the Kundalini, and it's spontaneous. Then comes great joy, and at the same time, an ache in your heart. You feel that ache because you have not yet seen him, and you want to see him. Then comes greater earnestness. You feel him very near, yet you feel frustrated. There is such inner joy, and at the same time, an ache. It is a peculiar experience, but wonderful. Then you find that craving for sense objects becomes less and less. Things that used to give you pleasure no longer do. And the way the Swami explained this is that he said, imagine yourself in this long hallway. You're at one end of the hallway, the west end of the hallway, the west being the land of death and manifestation. But you've done your spiritual practices, and so you see that brilliant, attractive, shining light at the other end of the hallway. And so you spontaneously, through your earnestness, through your spiritual practice, you begin to move toward that light. And the Swami said, you spontaneously leave behind. You don't have to think about it so much. You don't have to work at it so much. Just focus on what you're moving toward. And you move away from the things of the West, the sense objects and the things that bind us to this life of ignorance, suffering, and death. So the Swami puts it this way, then you find that craving for sense objects becomes less and less. Things that used to give you pleasure no longer do. So it's relatively easy to move away from them. But you get a higher pleasure. And craving lessens as your ego becomes less and less assertive. What does the Swami mean by your ego becomes less and less assertive? This reflection. There is only one ego, we're told by the scriptures and by the saints and swamis. There's only one I maker, ahamkara. It's reflected in us. It's reflected in us. But we think, because of this reflection, that we're separate. And so, in the beginning, quite necessarily, for us to be successful in this world, that ego has to be somewhat assertive. But as we involve ourselves less and less with things of the world, as craving for things of the world lessens and that ache increases, the ego spontaneously becomes less and less assertive, simply because it becomes, as Sri Ramakrishna says, like a shy child in the presence of this greater power, this greater being. So before we go on to the next talk, which is self-effort and divine grace, you can see how this moves, in terms of subject matter. The Swami's talks have been organized in such a way as to move smoothly from one subject to another. But before we go on, are there any comments or questions about what we've just read?
Hello, good morning, Brother Shankara. This
Good
is
morning,
Vijay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hello, Brother Shankara. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
Thank you. Thank you. One question, please. You just mentioned that there's only one ego, and it's the reflection that we are seeing that makes us feel different from each other. Now, some of us perceive within ourselves or in others more ego than in someone else. Secondly, sometimes internalizing, I may feel a higher presence of ego than at other times. If there's only one ego and every ego is a reflection of the same, how do I see more or less of it sometime?
Well, it just depends on what your intentions and your priorities are, Vijay. If you're thinking of things of the world and your worries and concerns in the world, then you'll feel this higher sense of separation and this need for the assertive ego to overcome your problems. But as Father Thomas Keating says, when you truly trust the Lord, when you truly trust God, you don't have a care in the world. Now, what you're doing when you truly trust God is trusting that one eye maker, that one being that has created itself as a manifest being in the world, Ishvara, Ishvari, and all of their various forms. So when we identify more with that, then our sense of ego is lessened. When we identify more with our worries and concerns and our issues, then we feel the need for this assertive ego to help us overcome them, which is a fiction. And we're going to learn about that particular, what is self-effort and what is divine grace in this next talk. But that's a very good question. We sometimes feel a greater sense of ego than others. But it's because of where we focused our attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Anything?
Brother Shankara, this is Haima.
Yes, Haima?
I have one comment that this refers to page 122, and there is the 10 friends swam across the flooded river, and then they made sure they counted, all of them got to the shore, and then they didn't count themselves. They've only counted 9 of them, and then kept wondering, where is the 10th one? And then the outsider comes and counts all of them. It's you, the 10th one. Do you think that has something related to this one? That story of 10 people swimming through the flooded river and crossing the river, and because that person doesn't have any ego, he never counted himself, he or she, and only counted the other 9 and made sure everybody got to the shore.
Mm-hmm.
Kept counting only 9, and then that person forgot completely self.
Well, Sri Ramakrishna has a slightly different interpretation of that story.
Okay.
for us to be self-forgetting in that way means that we're not really alert. We're not really present. Sri Ramakrishna was very anxious that we be present in the moment.
Yes.
And so both interpretations are possible and correct. I'm not saying that the one is wrong and the other is right.
Okay.
But Sri Ramakrishna used it as an example of our being inattentive to the facts of the matter. He used it as an example.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify. Thank you so much.
But it is, you know, it's a powerful story about, you know, 10 people swimming across the river, but once they got to the other side, did all 10 get there, or were some of them swept away? So they counted, and so the other interpretation is also possible.
Thank you so much.
Shankara ji.
Yes, Balakrishna. Good morning.
Hari Om, Hari Om.
Hari Om, Hari Om.
Swami Sarvapriyananda says, you know, like because the 10th person is not counting himself, because we are most of the times looking outside. We don't see our inner aspect of it.
Exactly. You're right. That's what I was pointing to, that Sri Ramakrishna, that's how Sri Ramakrishna sees this story. We're not self-aware. We're looking outside.
Yes.
And we're not self-aware. Well, good. Thank you for bringing it up. And of course,
also the other thing, the ego acts in different ways. You know, I think it's one of the places I read. It depends upon the gunas. When you are in a sattvic mode, yes, your ego is much less. But whereas when you are in a rajasic or tamasic mode, the ego would be higher.
Your sense of ego, yes.
Yes.
Your sense of the ego would be higher. Because you feel like you need it. You know, if you're in a rajasic mode, to get things done, to overcome your problems and get things done. When you're in a tamasic mode, oh, I'm so, everything is so wrong and so awful, and so I take refuge in my little ego, and I feed it some wrong food, and just lie on the couch and say, oh, woe is me. Focusing. The operative word in the sentence is me. Oh, woe is me, me, me. So yes, you're absolutely right. When you're in a sattvic state, you are not going to be as focused on the ego, because you're focused on what is being revealed. Good.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear. Swayam.
Yes, I don't have my video on, sorry. So is this, the other way to look at it is the unripe versus the ripe ego, and the unripe ego is more attached to the body-mind complex. So the pure consciousness then reflects through that to the things of the world. And as the ego ripens and the things of the world take a backseat, then you're able to see more of the clearer.
Yes, absolutely right, Swayam. But what the Swami was pointing out, it is for us to focus on our spiritual practice, and that light that we have seen, that brilliant, bright light of pure consciousness, that living presence that we have glimpsed, focus on that. And then we don't have to worry about ripe ego, unripe ego. Certainly we don't try and measure how ripe is my ego. Holy Mother specifically recommends against that. We read that recently in the Tuesday night class. Don't focus on trying to measure your own spiritual progress. It's a hopeless condition, as Swami Chitanananda says. So just focus on what it is that you're moving toward, what it is that's drawing you, and then let the rest take care of itself, was what Swami Prabhavananda said. If you do that, he said, the things in your life will spontaneously take a Godward turn, and that includes the ego. But you're absolutely right. It is the difference between the ripe and the unripe ego. The unripe ego is self-concerned, selfish, self-concerned, frightened, all those things. So yes, ripe and unripe ego.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
even when one is doing unselfish activities for the welfare of the community, does not define whether it's unripe or ripe ego, because you do need some kind of ego if you're involved in some rajasic activities for the welfare of others.
Well, if you are pursuing it as karma yoga and truly offering what you're doing to the divine presence, and recognizing what Krishna says, that you are not the doer, the gunas are the doer, so that the ego doesn't even get involved at that point. If the ego is involved, then you have a problem, because there's a selfishness. You're wanting to receive recognition, even if it's a kind of self-recognition. Oh, I'm doing a good thing. Swami Vivekananda says, ignore all that. Just recognize when you have the opportunity to serve, just be grateful. Be grateful. I have the opportunity to serve, and serve in that spirit. Serve Jiva as Shiva. And so you don't have to get your ego involved at all. Now, of course, most of us do. We think, oh, I'm doing a good thing. This is a good thing I'm doing. I'm giving some money. I'm offering somebody some of my time, so on and so forth. So it isn't. But as long as that is there, Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna say, that's not truly selfless. That's not really karma yoga. So, whenever we're thinking about ourselves and what we're doing, rather than the doing itself, then we have an issue. It could become a problem if it becomes sufficiently self-involved. And a problem, by that I mean an impediment to our spiritual progress.
Thank you for the clarification, Brother Shankara.
Cyndi?
I was just going to interject that a premeditated random act of kindness isn't a random.
Right. Any premeditated random act of kindness, that's beautiful. Yeah, right.
But
Yeah.
I did have a sort of a comment. I had a sort of a revelation while you were reading, going back to the part where you were reading about what happens when the Kundalini rises. There's this just joy, inexpressible. And then following that is this ache.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been talking about this a lot, over time and even recently.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually walking around taking care of some things this morning while you were reading that part, and it hit me for the first time, taking it away from the Vedic, Kundalini and all that stuff, taking it out of that and making it more universal, that experience of connecting with the divine, really connecting with the divine and having that experience, and then it being followed by that ache. It occurred to me that ache that is like this extreme loneliness that you feel in the universe because you have momentarily experienced what it's like to not feel alone at all.
Precisely.
And
Precisely.
and for me, you know, just on a personal level, and I know a lot of other people can probably relate to this, I think that is the key to depression. And, you know, 12-step groups will talk about addiction and alcoholism being a spiritual disease, a disease of the spirit. And it's this longing for, you know, a lot of people who do self-medicate seriously to the point of, you know, serious addiction and alcoholism. They're usually very sensitive people, and they may have had little bits, and they may be seekers, and they may have had that experience, and that experience of connecting with God, however it happens, is followed by that devastating aloneness. And I think that, you know, I think of Father Thomas Keating when you told the thing about if you truly trust in God, but also I think about when he went out one day, went out walking, and he noticed the trees, the leaves on the trees were just fluttering in the breeze, and he was like, oh, the trees are talking to me. And he was like, no, God is talking. And it's like everywhere. And it, you know, it's anyway, I'm babbling at this point, but that was that connection with that spiritual ache that follows the experience of brief connection.
Yes.
I think what depression is in the world, and alcoholism, and all of the issues that can lead us down a dark alley, or we can crawl out of it, you know, toward this light.
Yes. It is that sense of separation that is the central component of the ache.
Can I say something?
Please, Balakrishna.
But see, there is a difference. The ache, what you get when you are immersed with the God and God consciousness, is a pleasant ache. It is not a sad ache. That is what, you know, the difference is. I don't know, but that's what I read, and I, you know.
Then why did Sri Ramakrishna, you know, rub his face in the dirt and
No, Sri Ramakrishna rubbed his face and all those things because he could not wait to have the darshan of the Kali.
Well, that's exactly it, Balakrishna. That's exactly what she was saying. He couldn't wait. The ache was too great. There was he wept so hard and so much that people thought his physical mother had died. So you said no. I say yes, that is exactly what Sri Ramakrishna was feeling. And he said the ache became so great that it was like his heart was being wrung like a wet towel. And he grabbed for the sword to cut his own throat. So painful was it.
And he told people to weep for God. And there were those stories about, you know, holding somebody's head underwater, and you need to. So that's not a pleasant ache.
No. But see, I think the comparisons are a little different here. The pleasant ache comes when you are a bhakta and keep on doing your, mananam and everything. You do develop that stirring ache, yes, but that is a pleasant ache. Well, okay.
Well, for you,
that is my, yes.
For you. And you can find evidence of that in the Puranas and other scriptures. But I can tell you that that's not, it's a wonderful experience, the Swami says, but it is not pleasant in the sense of it's, as he said, it's peculiar. By that, there's nothing else like it. And of course, it will be different for every one of us. Each of us is unique. Each of us will experience it uniquely. So some will experience it as you have described it. Some will experience it as what in AA they say, oh, please, Lord, remove from me the burden of self. Because it is such a constant torment to them. The ache is so great. Others will experience depression. And Sri Ramakrishna was, he was in such pain, both physical and psychological. And of course, his pain will never understand the depth of his experience. Each of us just has to, but this is such a productive discussion because it gets to the fact that each of us is going to experience this differently. And we shouldn't think, I should experience it this way. You know, this was something that was an issue for me within the past 2 or 3 months, comparing my own experiences with the experiences that are described in that book, Love Poems from God, which is the testimony of saints. And, you know, the questioning, why don't I experience it the way they experience it? And finally, it occurred to me, by the grace, I suppose, oh no, I'll experience it however I experience it. I have to be authentically myself. And so I'm not going to be them. I'm not going to be like them. I'm going to be like me, whatever that is.
No, I agree with that. And I agree with Cyndi also completely. I'm just bringing up the topic, the other things that can happen also. I'm not questioning what Cyndi said a bit.
Okay, so you're both right. Very good. Everybody gets to be right.
It's all good.
It's all good. Let there be no misunderstandings amongst us. But I think it is important for us to remember that each of us will experience this in our own way. And that's what the Swami means by peculiar. Peculiar means something in and of itself, not usual, not generalizable. This is wonderful. Yes.
So I hope I'm going to be able to express what is in my mind in the right way. Sometimes, you know, the connections don't work very well. But when one comes to that intense ache part or the point, and if there's a fork where one can either go down the path of depression and, you know, start abusing drugs, alcohol, whatever, or the other path where you productively intensify, what protects one from not taking the wrong path? And is that again God's grace, or I don't know if I expressed myself well.
No, you expressed yourself very well. And the answer from here is that's above my paycheck. I really don't know. It seems to me that it has to do with the quality of that person's karma at the time that they are experiencing this. If they are still feeling sorry for themselves because of the way they feel, they're likely to self-medicate in some way. If they understand in some sense that that I feel, whether it be depression or just this intense sense of loneliness, it's because of the way I am thinking and speaking and acting, then they're more likely to try something more productive. That's the best answer I can give, Swami.
That is a wonderful answer, Brother Shankara. That is really nice.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
I think, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong or right, I don't know. It's also the amount of identification one has with one's feelings or thoughts
Yes.
at that moment, how identified you are with it. That leads you to one direction or the other. If you think.
Well, that's what I meant about feeling sorry for yourself. Yes, if your feelings and thoughts are those of feeling sorry for yourself, feeling self-pity because of your condition, then you're likely to do something that is less productive, something that is perhaps even self-destructive, because you're trying to evade the pain. That never works. Every alcoholic will tell.
I see. If you have that witness of feeling, towards what's going on, then you can, stay apart,
Yes,
from that.
absolutely.
Your feelings
That
and your thoughts.
that is the ideal. You've nailed it. That's if you can say, this is not me. I am the witness.
Mm-hmm.
I am not my feelings and my thoughts and my physical condition. I am the witness to all this. This is something happening in my presence. And remind yourself that, as Krishna says so explicitly, don't delude yourself. You are not doing this. You are not the doer. It is the gunas and the gunas alone that are the doer. So this is how we must remind ourselves. That's what I mean about the components of our self-expression are thinking, speaking, and acting, doing. If we analyze it from the perspective of the witness, we see, oh, well, that is all that thinking, speaking, and doing is something of the gunas. And so spontaneously, more sattva will manifest in that, because you aren't concerned. You don't get trapped into thinking there's a problem, there's something wrong here. No, it's just, that's what's happening. But that's difficult. And it takes years to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse being the witness rather than the sense of this separate doer, thinker, actor. And this is exactly what the Swami is going to address in this next talk. Self-effort. What is self-effort and what is divine grace?
But there is one more thing, if I may.
Please, Balakrishna.
I think these are the times what we are doing right now, that is satsang. The guru would help and direct them in the right direction.
Absolutely. If we make application to the divine presence, to the teacher, it's guaranteed. Every one of them says, what did Christ mean when he said, ask and ye shall receive?
Yes.
If you ask for bread, will you be given a stone? If you ask for fish, will you be given a serpent? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you. I mean, these are the stupendous promises of one of the greatest teachers ever to come to earth. That isn't just my opinion. That was Sri Ramakrishna's opinion, Vivekananda's opinion, Swami Prabhavananda's opinion.
Yes.
So we don't need to look beyond the teachings, and if we read the gospel every day, if each of us just reads a couple of pages of the gospel every day, it helps keep us aligned. It helps keep us, our mind attuned to the truth behind what it means to be the witness. Because you can see Sri Ramakrishna ever and eternally taking refuge in that witness position and speaking from there.
Brother Shankara, I just want to make one comment from what Swayam has commented.
Yes, yes.
It's why people take different turns from the take is when the biopsychosocial and spiritual factors are not aligned well, then they can go into the other direction. When they are aligned, I think, I'm thinking there are so many other components there, social support, biological, psychological, and spiritual factors. When they are not aligned, that from that age, they could go into drunkenness, or they could be more higher into spiritual level.
And many people
Yes,
from AA and the other 12-step programs
yes,
make the connection with some spiritual, more overt spiritual tradition. AA and the other 12-step programs are one of the, probably the best application of practical spirituality. And as Cyndi pointed out, within those 12-step programs, their addiction is seen as a spiritual disease, not a physical disease, a spiritual disease, a disease of the spirit. And so they move from there to some recognition that they are powerless in the face of, they as the small self are powerless in the face of their addiction, and that only the power of the divine of their understanding can give them the strength.
thank you.
Swami Prabhavananda's barber, for example, had been a drunk for many years before he came to Swami Prabhavananda. And when he came to Swami Prabhavananda, he was a mess. I mean, he was a mess. His name was, his spiritual name the Swami gave him was Naren. He became very saintly, very, very just, it just seemed like a wonder that Naren kept his feet on the ground. He just became so light. But he was the Swami's barber. That was his profession, was barber. And so but he had been, you know, I mean, a hardcore drunk for many years. And somebody told him, somebody else in the program, when he took refuge in the program for a while, said, oh, you ought to meet this Swami Prabhavananda. So he had the good sense or the good karma, whatever you want to call it, to do that. Then it made all the difference in his life. Like I say, at the end, when you would see him, the end of his life, he just seemed like a hologram. Didn't seem like a flesh and blood human being anymore. Anything else, dears?
I think, unfortunately, perhaps in the established medical lingo, these are considered mental health conditions. There's probably not as much direction towards the spiritual aspects of it. So there's a quick, and it's not wrong, but I don't know if it's wholesome to just focus on medications and treatment.
Well, no, not just, but the medications can make life bearable for someone who suffers from these neurological conditions, psychoneurological conditions.
Right.
They can make life bearable and therefore enable a person to make much faster and further progress, and real progress, than they might if they were unmedicated. So these medications, if we just think about what the world was like in 1863 when Mother was born, and what it was like in 1963, just 100 years later, we can see what it means for Saraswati to be born among us. Saraswati, the goddess of learning, intelligence, music, expression. You know, she appeared as what? She appeared as Madame Curie. She appeared as Albert Einstein. She appeared as Max Planck. She appeared as, who's that great woman who helped discover bacteria? There was Pasteur, and then there was that woman. I don't remember her name. She was an English woman. Anyway, just all of these advances just came, not because Mother willed it. Mother didn't say, do this, do that. No, it's just that energy came into the world and transformed our suffering. Transformed our suffering. And so these things are a gift of the divine presence being in the world. That's my sense of it.
Right, that's right. It's just that sometimes that seems to be the only focus. I have a family member in India that has been on just medications without anything else for years, and it's like kind of not allowed for expression of anything else. So.
Well, it's a shame that someone doesn't introduce that family member to, or maybe they have, and he or she doesn't listen.
Right. Yeah.
Everything happens. This is something Sri Ramakrishna repeated over and over. Things happen at the right time. There is no such thing as coincidence. And it has to do with our karma, which is absolutely impenetrable to us. We can't understand our own, let alone someone else's. This is one of the reasons we must not judge others. Because there's no way for us to understand their karma and what it is that they're actually experiencing, what it is to walk in their shoes. This has been a very productive discussion. I'm really glad we started down this path and we're doing this. Anything else before we read on?
I just wanted to say something about what Swayam was saying about, medication sort of being, there's a man, Andrew Solomon, who's got some wonderful books and TED Talks about depression. And even though medication basically saved his life, he had very serious depression. He said what we have today in the way of treatment for mental illness is barbaric. And yet it's what we have, and it's so much better than what we did have, which is what Brother Shankara was just saying. And the problem with the treatment today, I mean, part of it's big pharma, big pharma as they call it, and also the fact that people are just living their lives too fast, too busy, and so many people with a medically classified mental illness, if they can get treatment at all, so many people don't have health insurance, or they have very limited health insurance. And there are not the resources to treat the mentally ill, so to speak, using the Western model, properly. So they just throw drugs at them. And that can be helpful for some people who can get therapy too, and who are self-motivated to get better. But if it's just medication, it may just be kind of keeping them alive longer or not. It is certainly not a cure or a standalone. And those who can find some sort of higher therapy, whether it's, you know, whatever their spiritual path is, to combine with that can go a much longer way faster.
Yes.
But yes, the medication for those who truly need it can facilitate in the spiritual practice. It is. Everything's connected. It's not just one thing.
Yes. And following that logic, there are many, many people, as you said, who have no medical insurance, who have no access to even the as you pointed out, still rather primitive methods that we have. And so what do? Well, there's some very interesting research. I won't go into the details. You can find it for yourself on why there have been so many opioid deaths. And it is that ache of separation and loneliness. That's what the researchers have found. It is the ache of separation and loneliness that causes these people to become addicted to opioids and oftentimes die as a result, because they feel so cut off and alone and abandoned by the society in which they live. And this is not political research. This is pure scientific research about why so many opioid deaths. You can find it if you look. There's a wonderful column by columnist David Brooks that summarizes it and points to a number of the books and research studies.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
So I was just thinking that social isolation and lack of social support can be categorized and included under one of the mental illnesses, which is not been so far. You know, the loneliness is considered not a mental disease, but it can lead to a mental disease. And
Yes,
more often it's not recognized as such.
They're interactive. You're absolutely right. They're interactive. Some of you know, probably all of you know, that my younger brother, Evan, is now homeless, suffers from both a bipolar disorder, which is now unmedicated because he won't cooperate with what's necessary to get him medications, and because of his lifestyle of drinking and smoking marijuana over a period of more than 40 years, he has degenerative brain disease. And I can't even imagine what it must be like to be him now. I mean, I've tried to interact with him and without success. And so this is very personal for me. And I'm sure it is for each of you and people that you know and your own personal experiences, maybe a family member. This is the Kali Yuga. This is, and if you read about what that means, if you read about it in the gospel, if you read about it elsewhere, it is a time of acute separation. The separation is thin. It's like crepe paper. If you do some just little spiritual practice, you can break through it. But before that, it's like a wall of black crepe paper separating you from the divine.
I think, Brother Shankara, one of the curses of the modern age And technology has led to this too, for isolation and, you know, depending on technology, there's no personal interactions, and the society is changing so fast in that direction,
Yes.
getting more and more impersonal contacts.
Yes. And look at what's happened with the virus, the COVID-19. A lot of what was cushioning this sense of social isolation has been taken away. It's a very, very hard time we're living in, which is why I'm so glad we're meeting together like this while we have these times together. And you know, we'll start next week. We'll start with self-effort and divine grace because we're almost out of time. But this has been a very productive use of the time, talking about what Swami Prabhavananda said in that talk, Spiritual Unfoldment. Tomorrow morning, for those of you who are so moved, the talk is titled Where There Is Love. And it is part of a phrase from Swami Vivekananda, where there is love, there is no fear. And it's, of course, it's a bhakti related. It's about the practice of bhakti yoga. So that'll be at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you want to read a little bit about what the talk is, you can go to the newsletter. There's a summary. Anything else before we wind up? All right, this has been wonderful. This is exactly what it's meant by let us study the art of spirituality together. And as Swami Brahmananda said, come, let us go forward together. And we have been going forward together. This is beautiful. Sato ma satkamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritangamaya, abir moiti. O dearly beloved Lord, lead us from thy manifest truth to thy highest and absolute truth. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through. Light us through and through with thy everlasting, shining presence. Thank you, all of you, for your contributions. Thank you for being here. So sweet. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai, Durga, Durga, Durga. Go in Mother's loving and protective embrace until tomorrow morning or the next time we see one another. Jai Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Ma.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Thank you, dears.
Thank you, Brother Shankar.
Thank you, dear. See you soon.